Afternoon, America. Brian James Blem here. I want to welcome you back to another episode of What the Fuck's Up. What do I want to talk about today? I want to talk about the national security state, the military-industrial complex, and its penchant for war. And most members of Congress who appear to support a continuation of the Cold War against Russia. For what reasons? I think it all boils down to, folks. It all boils down to this. I mean, look at all the anti-Trumpers, right? What do they want? They want a continuation of the status quo. They want a continuation where the United States federal government runs this huge war machine, sends all these trillions of dollars to USAID so that the national government can go do what it wants overseas, and likewise can funnel money through other organizations, non-governmental organizations, back into the United States where they can affect politics and political outcomes. So let's talk about the world a little bit, okay? Well, what I have drawn on the board here, and my artistry sucks, really. I can't draw. I've never been a drawer. But most maps that you look at these days, right, they have the Western Hemisphere, North America, South America. It's a pretty obnoxious looking Central America there. But then they have Africa, Europe, Russia, and Asia, and then Australia on the right hand side of the map as you're looking at it, right? It's a very easy map, to manipulate people's minds. And I talk a lot about propaganda and things on this show. And that reminds me, if you haven't watched it yet, watch Out of Shadows. Out of Shadows. You can find it on Twitter. Excellent show. And it talks about just how manipulative the Central Intelligence Agency and the national security agencies have been in your life throughout the Cold War. They want to keep this war going, folks, because it gets them money and it gives them power. And most importantly, it gives them control over you, right? After all, I mean, they've got enough power, they get your money out of your paycheck before you ever even see it. And so, looking at the world like this, it's easy to divide the world, right, into us versus them. We can take this red pin and we can say, oh, we got the communists on one side and we got, all the good people on the other side, right? The us versus them, the good versus bad. The evil versus the godly, right? It's how we divide things. It's how we make enemies. It's how we keep enemies, folks. But let's take a look. I like this map here of the world better than I like the map I drew. Not because necessarily the map I drew sucks, but this map, I think, shows the world in a better light if you are an American, right? And so if you're out looking for maps, I'd strongly suggest you buy this type of a map because it shows truly where America is in relation to the rest of the world, right? What are we talking about? We're talking about war in the Ukraine. And the Ukraine is right over here, folks. The Ukraine is right over here. This is an old Cold War map. So this still has the Union Soviet Socialist Republics on it, which Senator Murkowski ended in 1991 along with the Warsaw Pact, right? So get off your Cold War high horse. McCain Institute wants to continue this Cold War. Why? Because it's about money and it's about power, folks. Money and power and control over you. But let's take a look. Let's go back through history, right? Russia. What is America's closest non-contiguous neighbor? And if you don't know what contiguous means, it means shares a border with, right? Canada is a contiguous neighbor. Mexico is a contiguous neighbor. Cuba is not, because it does not share a border with the United States. Cuba is 90 miles away from the United States, and it is not America's closest non-contiguous neighbor. Who is? If you guessed Russia, you are 100% correct, because Alaska and Russia no longer the Union Soviet Socialist Republics, are separated by about a mere 55 miles, right? 55 miles in this strait called the Bering Strait. If you just look at actual territories, the Diomedes Islands, the Russians have Big Island, the United States has Little Island. They're separated by about 2.4 miles. That's how close the United States is to Russia. Hell, you could go out here and swim to Russia. You can't swim to Cuba. Well, some people can swim to Cuba, but not me. And so Russia is actually the United States' closest non-contiguous neighbor. You would think we would want good relations with Russia rather than this constant state of hysteria and this constant state of warfare on behalf of a Ukrainian president who he banned opposition political parties, folks. He eliminated free speech. He banned the press. The only way you can get news media in the Ukraine is through the state-sponsored news media. He's jailed his opposition, folks. He has canceled elections in the Ukraine. Zelensky is an autocrat. So anybody telling you he is a man fighting to defend freedom is just blowing hot air up you know where, right? And so the Cold War, folks, the Cold War, let's go through a little bit of U.S.-Russian history, shall we? Russia, how many times has it invaded the United States? 0, right? During the American War for Independence, Russia said, yeah, we're going to stay neutral. They stayed out of it. Didn't want to get involved. Between the Civil War and the War for Independence, did Russia ever invade the United States? Not that I'm aware of, and I've studied a hell of a lot of history. Civil War, excellent time if Russia wanted to get involved in the United States. Did it? To a limited extent. Russia had 2 years before the United States did abolished slavery. Most people probably don't know that. Russia abolishes slavery 2 years before the United States did. Russia supported Abraham Lincoln and the Union over the South, and Russia's limited involvement in America's Civil War was to send about 5 or 6 ships to guard the port of San Francisco and about 8 ships to guard the ports up around New York City so Southern raiders couldn't raid into those ports. That was the full extent of their involvement, folks. They didn't take advantage of America's internal division to create havoc and to try to conquer territories and to do all of that stuff that the United States does. Okay, and so Russia, hasn't been an enemy for a very long time. Now we get to the 1900s, right? We see all kinds of turmoil in Central Europe, in Russia, which was still Russia in the early 1900s. And so in 1918, the United States actually sends troops into Russia. The United States has had armed forces in Russia before to fight on behalf of the whites in opposition to the Bolsheviks, the communists, to try to quell this communist uprising that was taking place in Russia. Of course, the communists won, and then they created the Union Soviet Socialist Republics, right? And so the United States and the USSR, as it became, were actually allies of sorts during World War II, because both were fighting the Axis powers, the Nazis in Germany. And so when the Nazis invaded the Union Soviet Socialist Republics, we told them we would help them. But what did we do, the United States? The United States said, let's let the Germans work as much pain on the USSR and the communists as possible before we actually do anything. And that way, we can kill two birds with one stone, right? But, aside from, the Cold War tensions that came about after World War II, in large part because of the United States and its vast military buildup that took place during World War I, the United States and Russia had a pretty good relationship, right? Russia sold to the United States Alaska. In fact, if you come up to Alaska, you can actually go visit some Roman or some Russian Orthodox churches that were built by the Russians. They still in existence. Go to Juneau and some of the other places. And so the United States and Russia, have not really been enemies at loggerheads other than through the Cold War. So who does the Cold War benefit, folks? Look at what the Cold War was. The Cold War was people like the national security state, right? The United States Armed Forces and all of the weapons manufacturers mucking around in Indochina, mucking around in South America, Central America, mucking around in Mexico, as the United States and the Soviet Union have these wars through proxies, right? And the national security state has loved this because, what kid doesn't want to be a spy, right? What kid didn't grow up wanting to be a spy, right? Raise your hands. Well, don't worry about it because I can't see it anyway. But anyway, everybody wanted to be a spy when they're a kid. At one point, it's fun. They make it look fun, the movies, right? The movies make it look, it's packed with action, it's packed with adventure, it's packed with all of this stuff. Go watch Out of Shadows, people. Go watch Out of Shadows, right? The Central Intelligence Agency plays a role in Hollywood, and they propagandize the American people through the movie industry, and that's a simple fact. It's been happening forever, well, not forever, but at least since the birth of the Cold War at the end of World War II and the creation of the Central Intelligence Agency, right? And so when we look at the world, folks, at the actual world, we are distant from what is actually taking place in Eastern Europe, while we just about share a border with Russia, right? Russia, the country that the national security state and all those in Congress who benefit from it want to wage this Cold War against. The question as American citizens and as U.S. taxpayers that you have to ask yourself is, why are we supporting this war way over here, right? This would be the third European war in the last 100 years, right? The last 100 and a couple plus years. And so why do we need to be here? And my answer to that question is we don't. That is not our war, although we helped to start it because the president of the Ukraine was more favorable to Russia. The Europeans wanted him to enter into a free trade agreement and to an alliance with the West Europeans against the East Europeans and the Russians in particular. He said no, was going to stay out of it. And so Barack Obama overthrew the elected president of the Ukraine, and we have the circumstance and situation that we have today as people work very hard to ensure that the military-industrial complex that runs amok all over the world, Africa, South America, Indochina, China, and even in West Europe, where we interfere in elections and we basically muddle in everybody's affairs to try to make everybody more like us. Not more like us, more like what they want them to be, right? Which is docile and complacent to the wishes of those in the United States of America who make decisions, who have the power, who have the authority, right? And so it's time, folks, that America finally put to bed. It is time that America put to rest the Cold War, which ended in 1991, which the villainous and evil Union Soviet Socialist republics dissolved, went away, to be no more. And with that, I say peace.